Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and this is a Patreon voted topic about, well, top 10 polarizing games. Now, I threw out the title because it sounded like a good title, and I didn't really think it through, unfortunately, and turns out mostly, not all, but most of what I put together is not so much polarizing as it is overrated. Now, I don't really agree with the term overrated. I think overrated is another code word for thing that the general amount of people in this world rate more highly than I do myself. Generally, the nature of ratings is that they are, well, reflective of what people actually think about something. Just because my own taste is not aligned with that, or your own taste is not aligned with that, does not mean that that thing is overrated. But when something does have a degree of fervor around it, very often there is an overlap, thus making many of these titles polarizing because of the fact that they are rated so highly in this space, or popularity, or any of those things. Now, Monopoly is not on this list. Things adjacent to Monopoly perhaps might be, but we'll go through it. And I'm going to start off with, two timestamps down below, as always, in case you want to jump to any particular section. And I'm going to start off with two things that didn't really make the list because I debated. They were on the short list, but I think they're less talked about or less polarizing as they once upon a time were. And those two things are going to be Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition and Pandemic Legacy. Now, I did choose those two specifically, but they're more about the general concept about app-driven games as well as legacy-driven games, where there was a lot of fervor about both of these games, and to some extent there still is, to some extent, just not to the same way it used to be. When we talk about the idea of a game that relies on an app, a game where native app integration is essential. It's not a feature, it is a requirement to that game, and we still see people complaining about it. I myself tend to avoid games that need apps. There are exceptions, but I think in general we've definitely seen it die down to a degree. I remember last year we had Sea of Legends on Kickstarter, and there's definitely a lot of conversation about the app requirement, not requirement, all of that. But going back to XCOM, Alchemist, those are going to be two games that are older games. Older is a relative term. They're still fairly new, all things considered, but in the passage of time, as it were, they're old in our space. And when they came out, when Alchemist, when XCOM, when Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition, when these games came out, there were a lot of people who were unhappy, very unhappy, vocally unhappy about the merging of digital technology becoming an essential requirement to play in our tactile tabletop space. And I get it. I do. My own bias against them is more along the ideas that, well, I have two biases against them. The first is, as a religious Jew, I don't use these apps, I don't use technology on Saturday, on Shabbat, and to that end, anything that has an app, even if I love the theory or the premise or whatever, a good 70-80% of my game time is not going to be usable with that game, and so there's a personal practical bias against them. But even when they do show up, I have found that I tend to not enjoy these games. There are exceptions, to be sure, but I do find that an app-driven game pulls me out of the experience. Setting up Mansions of Madness, setting up Lord of the Rings Journeys to Middle-earth and playing through it and going back and forth between the screen and the game doesn't feel any more like I am playing a board game. So yeah, it's a polarizing conversation to some degree. And legacy games are going to have that other problem to a degree as well. Legacy games are going to have that issue where you're ripping up and destroying a game as you play through it. Something that we've become more familiar with now, something that we're more okay with. But back when there was Risk Legacy, some random offshoot game, not random offshoot game, but you know what I mean, where it wasn't, the number one game of all time. And that was fine for it to exist. But when the number one game of all time became a legacy game, a game that is destroyed as you use it, it's almost like another problem with the space, this tactile space of things we love. Why are we ripping up components? Why are we destroying the game as it's played? And again, we've grown used to it. We've also seen that they can deliver amazing experiences, but it certainly had its own controversy, polarization at the time. And that leads us to our actual list of 10 games, although those are long enough conversations they really should have been included. So I guess this is a typical Board Game Co. list with 12 games on our top 10 polarizing games. So, number 1, or number 10, or whatever it is, there's no specific order here, although this one is specifically in order. Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, which I don't have in my collection over here. I'll be having various games on this table as I go through them, but only the ones I have. Puerto Rico is definitely polarizing right now. Now, I'm not overly going to get into this one. Not overly, because, well, it's not really the main point of this video. At the same time, when I was thinking of polarizing games, I think right now and where we are, it currently has to be included. See, Puerto Rico is going to be the placeholder for any game around colonization of any kind, and there are many others, don't get me wrong, but I think Puerto Rico has become that forefront of what people talk about when they're having this discussion. About the idea of having either slaves, colonies, some form of something in games that is hurtful or problematic to many people, that many people will be sensitive about it. And I don't mean sensitive in the stance of like you shouldn't be, I'm saying it's going to be something that triggers a sensitivity. Now, speaking for myself, I haven't been bothered by these things. Now, that doesn't mean they're okay. Not in the slightest. It means that it's not something that was personal to me, and I never saw it for the potential issue it was or wasn't. Now, I do recommend watching, no pun included, has a great video on this. I'm going to link to it down below. But one of these things, and I would challenge anyone, and, well, I guess, let's take a step back. The general idea, just in case it wasn't clear, the general idea is when you put any form of slaves in a game, it can be hurtful or triggering to those who have a history associated with that. To those that it's not an abstract good like any other, but it could genuinely be friends, family, ancestors, or just cultures that to some extent are being involved in a game as a commodity. That's something that, again, I understand everyone who says this doesn't personally bother me, and I understand everyone who says it does personally bother me. What I would say is to those who are not bothered by it, not being bothered by something isn't a excuse for its existence. The question isn't whether you're bothered by something. The question is, is that thing offensive and problematic in its own right? Now, I'm not saying don't go out and buy Puerto Rico. I'm not saying don't have any games that have any form of colonization in them. That's not what I'm saying. I think having the conversation is a good starting point to any of these topics because, again, speaking for myself, I certainly walked into this thinking, when I first encountered these conversations, when I first heard them, I certainly walked in with that bias of, oh, great, another thing that we have to make an issue of that shouldn't be an issue. But is it that clear? Because my instinctive response as a Jewish person, as an individual, Jewish individual with Jewish history, I'm like, well, I'm playing Memoir 44 against the Nazis. Does it really matter? I'm not bothered by that. But I think it would be a different conversation if it wasn't Memoir 44 fighting against the Nazis, in a war sense, but if it was a slightly different conversation around perhaps the utilization of people in concentration camps to more efficiently move your resources around the board, I think that would be a little bit more bothersome to me. So it's interesting to try to find not the reasons why something shouldn't be a problem, but always look for the counterpoint. If you're if you're someone who is bothered by this conversation, if you're someone who's bothered by the existence of colonization in board games, try to look at the other side. Why should it be okay? What excuses or reasons can I find why it should be okay? And the reverse is true as well. If you're someone who's not bothered by it, look for the reasons why it might be a problem. In general, I find trying to take the opposing viewpoint will allow us to see where the other side is coming from and to start talking to each other instead of talking at each other. But that's, again, a bit of more of a tangent around the idea that Puerto Rico, I think, certainly is a polarizing game nowadays. Number 9, I guess. Marvel United. Far less of an issue. Far less of an issue. But chibi miniatures and light gameplay in CMON's first Marvel title with tons of miniatures, this was an opportunity for them to provide the best game ever, perhaps a little hyperbolic, but it was certainly an opportunity for someone to say, I want my Marvel-themed miniature game. I want to enjoy it. Sure, we have Marvel Crisis Protocol by Fantasy Flight, but that's more of a miniatures game. I want a board game with miniatures. CMON's the perfect company to deliver it, and then they slapped chibi miniatures and light accessible gameplay all over that, which turned people off to some degree. It turned people off. I remember myself, I remember I did a video, one of my first videos that did particularly well on the channel was a video about why I'm backing Marvel United. And I also was disappointed. I remember seeing the gameplay and being like, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. This does look lighter than I expected. And it is. It is definitely lighter than I expected. It doesn't make it not enjoyable, at least not to myself. I saw a comment on my video the other day. On last Tuesday, I had a whole list of videos. I had the Reckoners gameplay and Marvel United gameplay, and then comparing and contrasting Marvel United and the Reckoners in a play this, not that. And there's a comment about one point about how, there are a few different comments. One was, there are multiple comments about the idea that I'm still not interested. It has Marvel chibi miniatures, the gameplay's too easy, I'm just not interested. And there are other comments about how all the reviewers seem to be enjoying this game. And I think both those things are true. I think this definitely is a game that is not right for many people. But it's also a game that's fun. It's also a game that's light and accessible. Do I walk in with some degree of advanced strategy of how we're going to tackle the villain and win? No. I play cards down to a row and do what the card says, and I enjoy the process for it. Is there strategy? Absolutely. Is there a ton of strategy? Absolutely not. At least not core game. Maybe the expansions. I haven't had the opportunity to play all the expansions just yet, so I'm sure that will change to some degree. But base game Marvel United is a light, accessible game, and I think people wanted a lot more, and I think people still want a lot more. We have just Marvel X-Men United is now on Kickstarter as we speak, and that's more. You know, if your $250 of light chibi style accessible gameplay isn't enough for you, there's more to come. So enjoy that if you're someone who wants it, like myself, and I'm sorry for all those who wanted something more from this game system. Number 8. Number 8 is going to be Munchkin, which I don't have. Now, I debated including Catan in this list. I debated putting Catan in because it is, to some degree, Monopoly's too easy of a target here. Monopoly's polarizing, you know, the worst hated game, blah, blah, blah. It's not that bad. It's just that I agree with those who take issue with the fact that it is the face of our hobby, because it's popular, but also popular amongst younger. I'm getting on a tangent. Let's ignore Monopoly. Let's move back to Catan, which we're still not talking about. Catan is light, accessible. It's been around for a long time. It's been the face of the designer game side of the hobby for quite some time, and it's a good game. But it's also Catan, so whatever. But again, not Catan. I'm still talking about the games that I'm not talking about. We're up to like 15 games in our top 10 games. But Munchkin, I think, is a good target for this list. Munchkin is basically just smash down the leader, play the game for a while, play card after card, hurt and target the leader, and it's a game that many people enjoy. I'm realizing now Cards Against Humanity should have also been on this list. But Munchkin, up to 16 games, whatever. Munchkin is one that Steve Jackson Games has spawned line after line. I'm pretty sure it's Steve Jackson Games' best title to the degree that it outsells all their other titles combined. Because people like Munchkin. People have an affinity for Munchkin. Speaking of light, accessible gameplay, we also have a Come On Munchkin somewhere on the shelf I haven't played yet. I should play it. But maybe I shouldn't. Who knows? But Munchkin is one that is... It's one that many people are dismissive of, myself included. I played it once, and that was frankly enough for me. I do not like the gameplay style of let's just target the leader the entire game. A certain amount of target the leader is great. Terraforming Mars is a great example of this. Terraforming Mars has just enough hurting of the leader that it feels like there's a little bit of catch-up mechanic built into the game. But it's not so much that it feels like, well, I'm just going to be targeted and smashed the entire time until someone breaks through. It's just... Munchkin is just dumb, simple gameplay, which is fun for many people. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, lighter games to some degree are going to be a big part of this list. When we talk about overrated, I think in general, not always, in general, overrated games are going to be those that people say, that's too light. I don't know why it has a space so high up that list. But Munchkin is one that, again, for myself, I have no fond memories of it. Like I said, played it once, wasn't for me. But many people do. Many people like that system. The same way I like Marvel United. The same way I'm like, Marvel United is great, even if it's not the heavy dungeon game you're expecting. Well, Munchkin's great, even if it's not the deep, heavy card play you're expecting. It just depends on who the target audience is for any given game. And we'll go all the way to the other side of that spectrum and tackle number 7, Kingdom Death Monster. I think number 7. I tend to lose track throughout these lists, perhaps biased by the fact that I include more games on the list than I'd say I really will. Either way, Kingdom Death Monster, number 7. Kingdom Death Monster, which I don't own, and so can't talk about that one either with a physical game. But Kingdom Death Monster is definitely going to be a polarizing board game with you know, dark anime slash, not semi-anime, anime adjacent, but a dark, twisted world with, you know, half-naked people left, right, and center, and cutting testicles off lions. The first time I heard that, I still didn't understand that this was a genuine moment in the game where you cut the testicles off the white lion the first time you face it, ideally if you actually live and do what you're supposed to do. That's a fascinating concept to me in a board game. And I don't mean fascinating as a positive thing, I mean it as that's an interesting idea. I wonder what that person was thinking of when they decided to include that in their game. Is it different? Absolutely. Is it memorable? Absolutely. Is it something that potentially gives you an experience that no other game will? Well, considering you're cutting the testicles off a lion that you're fighting, I think so. I think, yes, it will give you an experience that no other game will. Doesn't mean it's right for you. That's a longer conversation. I tend to be biased against Kingdom Death Monster because of the dark, gritty world it presents. I'm just not pulled in by that system, and I'm happy I'm not, because honestly, I tend to go all in on things, and that's not a game that is cheap to go all in on. But it's also so appealing. the people who rush to its defense time and time again, there is clearly a passionate fan base around this game. People who love this game and people who love to hate this game, or in the case of myself, people who love to poke a little bit of fun at this game. I probably shouldn't do that, but I do like to do that. But yeah, King Death Monster. That's going to be our number 7 pick. Which brings us to number 6. I can start bringing games back in the picture again, which is going to be Etherfields. Etherfields is our number 6 pick on this list, and this is not so much about a general larger conversation, so much it is about the fact that this game, speaking of no pun included, we'll bring them back to this video, no pun included and Shut Up and Sit Down issued scathing reviews of this game. Absolutely scathing, how dare this game exist level scathing. I think I might be over-dramatizing, but I don't really think I am. I mean, no pun included literally threw it in the garbage can, and Shut Up and Sit Down said, I've never been so happy to give a game a bad review. Although, perhaps it wasn't never been so happy, but it's something about happy to give this game a negative review. So, scathing, I think I'll stick with the word scathing. And yet, this is a game that people love. Etherfields is a game that gets as much praise as it does critique, as much obsession about the unique world that they managed to build in this game, while at the same time, people are talking about the fact that the rulebook is a mess to get through. The slumbers. The slumbers are just such a cycle and dredge of a slog through the game. And then, by the way, they did just release in the update the continuous integration dream mode to address that complaint. But yeah, Etherfields has praise and criticism left, right, and center, and as much as I'd love to say no pun included and Shut Up and Sit Down of being dramatic for the sake of being dramatic, and I mean throwing a game in a garbage can might be dramatic for the sake of being dramatic, well, it could be both. But at the same time, I understand where they're coming from. This is a game that I thoroughly enjoy, and yet I think most, if not all, of the critiques around it are fairly justified. The rulebook is a mess to get through. I had to download a separate guide in terms of it being able to enjoy it. These slumbers are a slog. I kind of skip them now. I get to the point where I play one slumber every session, and then I just keep going and dream and dream and dream and make up what I need to get through these slumbers. So yeah, Etherfields has love and praise and hate and disgust. Disgust might not be the right word. Love and praise and hate and dismissiveness or something in equal measure. But it's one that I would recommend you give a shot if you can get past all the negatives that people have talked about. If you don't mind downloading a guide to get through. If you don't mind using the continuous integration slumber mode or whatever it is. If you find that you don't like the slumbers, then Etherfields has a lot of unique promise and narrative and story and just feeling different compared to any other game I've ever played. Next up, we have Castles of Burgundy. A game that has been trashed, absolutely trashed for its art, not once, but twice. Now, I do have a broken token insert in here with all the components. I'm not going to let it just sit there for too long. But Castles of Burgundy is a game that was, I think it's number 17 on Board Game Geek, the 17th highest board game of all time. It's insane, and yet the artwork for this game is abysmal. Twice the artwork for this game is abysmal. They came out once a long time ago, and people were not impressed then. And then they came out with a new, reprinted 20th anniversary edition something. I think 20th anniversary of the company, not the game, something like that. But either way, the new amazing edition, people are excited. They were looking forward to it. Finally, Castles of Burgundy with a graphic design and art style that we can all uniquely embrace together, blah, blah, blah. It didn't happen. It did not happen because the new art was just as bad as the old in a different way. I actually have the new edition, but I kind of wish I had the old one. I have the new one because, feature expansion compatibility, all the expansions together at once, some slight component upgrades and all that. But the new edition compared to the old, by the way, the box in this is garbage, but the new edition compared to the old, the art is just as bad in a very different way. It doesn't have the unique old charm that the old one does. Now it feels like someone updated it and didn't bother to make sure it looks good. Now, I'm always fascinated by this when it happens because we see this a lot in board games, new versions of a game with art that people just don't like. And I'm always intrigued what the process a company goes through. What is that process? Do they just commission 17 artists or something like that and then one person picks it? Does it go through some sort of review? I have no idea what that process looks like. And no disrespect, I guess there was disrespect to the person who did the art for Castles of Burgundy. I guess you can't avoid disrespect when you say it looks like garbage. That is a bit of a problem. I would say it looks like garbage to me. Can I change it to that? Because it is. There are a lot of people who are totally fine with the art. And for myself, while I am not impressed with the art, Castles of Burgundy is just a good game. It's just a good game. So I don't particularly care. I'm just going to have it in my collection and call it a day. Number something, I think 5, I could be wrong, is going to be Food Chain Magnate. Number 4, 4, Food Chain Magnate. I think it's 4. I'm pretty sure it's 4. So, Food Chain Magnate by Splotter Games. And this is going to be a general conversation around Splotter Games in general, but Food Chain Magnate, I think, more specifically than the general conversation. Let's move these up here, because I'm going to need some of the space over here. And Food Chain Magnate is one that I think is controversial, along with other Splotter games, because of how punishing they are to new players. This is a game that you either want to play it with people who are learning it for the first time like you, or you want to play it with people who are going to hold your hand and walk you through the process that first game, because that first game, you will be taught the game. That's fine. Great. You now know the rules. And then you'll jump into it, and you will butcher everything up on the first turn. You will make horrific mistakes, because this is a game where your first turn literally genuinely decides whether you are still a candidate for the running of the game or not. It's a game where you get told all about these milestones, and that's great, and you decide to pursue a milestone that just doesn't bode well in the long run. Play this game against experienced players. And by experience, I don't mean experience. I mean play this game against somebody who played the game twice before, and they will trounce you. Absolutely trounce you. I put out a video a while ago about mastery in board games, and Splotter is definitely one of those games that is on my mind when I think about that conversation, about the idea that games should bring people together. Unless you're playing it for the sake of a tournament or a competition, games are about spending time with others. And games that introduce elements that prevent that from happening, in the case of Splotter games, that gap between a new player and an old player, well, that takes away from the experience. Now, for myself, I want people to enjoy Food Chain Magnate. And so for myself, I recognize that a sacrifice that I will make every time I'm introducing someone new to Food Chain Magnate is playing an hour-long introductory game where I teach you the game, we walk through the first few rounds, and then you get that little light bulb moment where you're like, oh, I should be getting these milestones and setting myself up that way, because otherwise I have no chance of surviving in this competitive landscape. Splotter games tend to have that as a feature, as a bug, whichever one you want to call it. The idea that there is such a degree of knowledge and essential strategy required that you can destroy your entire game if you don't play that first turn correctly. And that's why a lot of people like them, like myself. And that's why a lot of people are dismissive about them. I'm not dismissive, but I understand where it comes from. I do understand. But that's going to be Splotter games. Number 4. Number 3. Let's see if I can grab it. Number 3. Whoa. Oh, see, should have set this up better. But Zombicide. Now, I did debate grabbing all the Zombicide that I have on my shelf for this video. But the problem with that is I'm not sure if you understand just how much Zombicide I have on my shelf. And that's going to be even after having, not all of it, but a lot of it condensed into various boxes. I'm going to try to push this over as much as I can without knocking everything off the table. But Zombicide. This is a game where every few years they come out with a new version. And sometimes it's every year. I mean, let's think about it. Zombicide, the first edition came out in what, 2008 maybe? I don't know offhand. But whatever the first edition of Zombicide came out, we've had Season 1, Season 2, Season 3. We've had Black Plague, we've had Green Horde, we've had Invader along with Black Ops together. We'll count them separately. We have Night of the Living Dead, we have 2nd edition, and we have Wild West. That is 9 versions of Zombicide, even if you include Invader and Darkside or whatever together as one. 9 different versions of Zombicide. In how many years? It's 2021. That's not a long time. Every year and a half, a new version of this game with hordes full of plastic and components and miniatures and abominations and all those things show up on Kickstarter, and people just jump on it like there's no tomorrow. I'm not judging you people. I'm part of you people. I went in on 2nd edition, and I went in on Wild West, and for myself, I am 99% certain that not all of these will last. They just can't. There's only so much Zombicide I can realistically play. I'd rather have variations of different game systems, of Massive Darkness alongside my Zombicide, of Besieged, although I'm getting rid of Besieged probably, of I don't know what else I have on my shelf, I have to take a look, but I like mixing up the games that I actually play, and having this much. Now, I don't have Seasons 1, 2, and 3. I don't have Night of the Living Dead, so I guess I'm only at 5. Yay me. But I still have too much Zombicide. That's definitely true. I have too much Zombicide. It can't all stay. I have to pick and choose which Zombicides will give me the best experiences, at least in my opinion, and I have to push forward with those. Which means Invader, it's on the chopping block. Zombicide 2nd edition, absolutely on the chopping block. I have to play it and see if it's a game for me. I have to see if something about this game system is an improvement over the original. And the campaign is not going to be enough, because I've played Wild West or whatever it is, Undead or Alive. I've played that game, and I already like aspects of Undead or Alive. So Zombicide 2nd edition is going to have to at least be better than that, because Undead or Alive also has a campaign thrown in. So, and I imagine they're probably similar in terms of what they do. So which ones of these will stay? Which ones will go? I don't know. Black Plague, I think, is a keeper for life. I think so. Green Horde, I'll probably keep because of the integration with Black Plague. I'm completely forgetting all the drama around this game, or the overhype, the reason why it's a polarizing game. It's a polarizing game because there's been 9 versions of this game, raising millions and millions of dollars while people continuously spend hundreds of dollars to own a slightly different variation of the thing they already do, which in theory should be polarizing, unless you consider that that is exactly what iPhone and Android madness is all about. People spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars to get a slight improvement or change, sometimes it's downstep, over the thing that they already own. You know what the difference is? The difference is when I sell my older Zombicide, it holds its value a whole lot more than that older iPhone or Android. So, I mean, polarizing, sure, I get it. When people look at people spending that much money on something that they don't need, there's also a degree of judgment, there's a degree of envy, because we all want to do that, just some of us consider ourselves more responsible than that, which I get. But others just want hordes of zombies on our table. Zombicide is a game that is such an accessible, friendly game for many, and it's such a stupid, silly game for others. It is definitely a polarizing experience, and the repeat of it every year and a half, I think, just makes it more so for those who don't buy into the love and the system that this is. Number 2. I'm realizing this whole system of grabbing boxes was not well thought out. Number 2. Terraforming Mars. And I do have a number 1 on the table as well, in case you want to guess about what that is. I mean, there's timestamps, so I guess it's not much of a guess. Number 2, Terraforming Mars. A game that is the number, 3 game on Board Game Geek. A game that is absolutely amazing. I love this game, and yet so many people are so judgmental for multiple facets. First of all, going to have the art, similar to the way we have Castles of Burgundy. The art of this game is just, I mean, it's clip art to the funniest, absurdist degree. Now, I actually like the art in Castles of and Terraforming Mars, not because it's good, mind you, but because I find it just ridiculous enough that it kind of has this charm of being not good art. I don't know how to explain it, but Castles of Burgundy, the charm isn't there for me. It's just okay art, and I move on and enjoy the game. Terraforming Mars, I like looking at those space elevators into the sky with this bizarre clip art or whatever it is. I'm not impressed by it, but amused by it. But it is one of the best games of all time, at least for myself, and that's the second degree of polarization, because there are so many people, components aside, who just don't understand or get why so many people love this game. To those who play the game and say, it's just playing a bunch of cards with text and abilities. Why is this game so special? What is it doing differently compared to every other card-based system out there? The answer is it does it well. It does it amazingly well. It's a game that I have to review. I have a review that I actually owe my patrons, because I told them a while ago I would do a review of this one, and then all the reviews started coming in for people I owe reviews to, so I'll get to it eventually. But Terraforming Mars is such an incredible experience. It's so streamlined in what you're doing as you try to seek to colonize Mars, and you increase the oxygen, increase the heat, put water on the planet, all those things, while you build a card system and engine around it, and definitely play with drafting. It adds so much to the experience, the tense decisions you have to make at any given point. Terraforming Mars is an amazing game. Absolutely amazing. I understand that many people don't get it. I understand that many people have a problem with the art. And I understand it's easy and fun to hate on, because that is what this list is about. Games that have a degree of polarization. And speaking of which, as I desperately tried to reach over this mountain of boxes because I did not think through how I was going to grab everything, finally we have it. There we go. Got it. We have, let me move this one over here, try to make sure I don't smash any boxes. We have Wingspan. Wingspan, a game that's actually leaving my collection. I just included this in a video about games leaving my collection for March or whatever it was. And Wingspan is finally going. But I would say Wingspan is going to be the main feature here, but really this is a placeholder for anything Stonemaier to a degree, because Stonemaier manages to have a degree of hype and buzz. Say what you will about their games, I don't know what they've done from a marketing stance, I don't know what it is, but they manage to have so much hype and buzz around every single title they release. They say they're dropping a title and people go crazy. You see video after video talking about the game. You see the videos pouring out when the game started arriving, everyone covering it, reviewing it. You see people like saying their statements of, yes, I love another Stonemaier game, or this is another one that didn't work for me. There's conversation and buzz around Stonemaier. Again, I don't know what Jamie Stegmaier has done. I don't know what he has managed. I don't know how he's engendered this hype and buzz around his properties. But there certainly is hype and buzz around his properties. And Wingspan is the number something game of all time. I don't remember what this one is. It's the number 1 family game of all time. It's definitely high up there in terms of the overall ratings. I don't know exactly where, but it's a game that so many people love, and then there are so many people who love to hate it. And there's so many people who look at it and say, first of all, it's a game about birds. I don't know, I'm using my thumb. First of all, it's a game about birds. And that's absurd. Why do we have a themed game around birds? No one should want to play that. Second of all, is the gameplay is lacking. And by the way, this is not me talking, this is the general whatever. The gameplay is lacking. You just play these cards, no one cares about them, they don't really do anything. I like Wingspan. I do. I admit that I don't personally see why it is the #1 family game of all time and why it's so highly rated. That's not something I personally see, but then again, there are those who don't see why Terraforming Mars is the best game of all time. And I know those people are wrong. So it's all good. We just have different preferences as to what it is we look for in games, what it is we get out of experiences. I think Wingspan is excellent. It's not one for me at the end of the day. There are other games I'd rather play when it comes time to pull it off the shelf. But it's one that certainly grew on me over multiple plays. My first play was, this is good. My second play was better. Third play was better than that. It is one that continuously grew, and yet, even now, even though I like it, even though I'll never turn it down, I don't ask for it. There are other card comboing systems I'd rather play. There's Terraforming Mars, there's Everdell, there's who knows what else that has fun card, tableau building, whatever it is, although Terraforming Mars does take quite a bit longer, so not a perfectly fair comparison. But all that said, Stonemaier Games, Wingspan, they manage to be polarizing in every single time one of their titles come out. Now, Red Rising, I'm actually looking forward to that one. That's one that I remember, what was it? We had Tapestry, we had Pendulum seemed gimmicky, but Red Rising is one that I'm definitely very much interested in trying. It looks like it has fun card comboing in a way that I will like. I don't think it's going to win any major awards. This is me just projecting my own opinion, having never played it, by the way. But I think it looks fun. It looks like something that I would enjoy doing, so I'm interested. But all their games, all their titles, manage to be polarized in some degree. So that's it. That is my list of top 10 polarizing games, most of which are games people would call overrated to some degree, or just too much in the general sphere, popularity, public eye, whatever you want to call it. What did I miss? I guarantee you I missed something. I tried crawling through. I came up with all the ones that, resonated with me off the bat that I could think of as a polarizing game, and then I just crawled through the top 500 games on Board Game Geek to see if I could find any others that had escaped my attention, because the lower you go, the less polarizing it gets. People love to hate on why a game is number 2 when it shouldn't be. No one really cares to fight that fight when it's talking about why a game that's 1,742 should be higher rated. Although now that I think about it, I actually should do a list. I should do a list myself of 10 games that I think should be rated higher than they are. Same exact problem, by the way. Ultimately, people's opinions are their own, and the fact that I love a game doesn't mean it should be rated higher than it is. But we can still talk about it. Until next time, I am Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and have a good one.